A few weeks ago, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party in the UK, tweeted out an anti-austerity video which then went viral. Now, I usually wouldn't comment on the politics of another nation, simply because I don't know enough to form an educated opinion. But I do know a thing or two about economics, and go figure, this one is extremely stupid. Let's watch the video in its entirety.
We need to make some cutbacks. Let's freeze teachers' wages.
Great idea.
I didn't get that pay rise, and the rent's gone up.
Well, we'll just have to cut down on our food bills.
Business is slow. We didn't make as much this month.
We'll have to cancel the renovations.
Sorry, we can't give you those extra hours. We lost a few contracts.
Oh, that's all right. I'm sure things will pick up.
Economic growth has slowed and the national debt is still going up. We'll have to make more cuts.
Great idea.
They've made more cuts at the school.
Well, we'll just have to tighten our belts a bit more then.
We'll start losing money.
We can't even afford the repairs now.
I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to cut your hours.
But I need that money. I've had my hours cut and I need to apply for working tax credits.
Fill in this form.
The economy's getting worse and now we're paying out more in benefits. Time to make more cuts.
Great idea.
I don't understand. Even after all our cuts, national debt has doubled and economic growth is terrible.
Maybe austerity doesn't work?
Of course, my favorite left-wing YouTuber was impressed by this, demonstrating yet again that he has no idea what he's talking about.
That was a very good ad.
So, in this ad, they're specifically talking about public employees not getting raises and the downstream effects that has on the economy. But here's what they failed to consider. Where does the government, which pays for these salaries, get its money? Well, it has two sources. It can either tax the citizens or it can borrow. If it raises taxes, that means other people will have less money to spend or save. That means you're going to get the same downstream effects, just with different people. But what if the government only raises taxes on the rich? Well, it is true that you're probably going to get some more spending, but the problem is you're still just moving money around, and the effects will be felt at the back end. Unless the wealthy people being taxed in this situation are simply putting money under their mattresses, that money isn't sitting idle. Banks use these savings to invest in new businesses, which create new goods and services, which is what actually spurs the economy. This was a point Ben Shapiro made when he debated Cenk Uygur.
Now you're making a strong case for Keynesian economics, which is totally fine, obviously. The problem with Keynesian economics is that it doesn't even work in theory, because again, once you go to the logical extreme, which is remove all of the money from the rich people who are saving all their money and give it to all the poor people to buy hamburgers, that doesn't help the economy or spur the economy. What spurs the economy is a higher level...
Right.
What spurs the economy is the creation of new products and services, and that is only going to be done by people who have expendable capital to actually invest in the new products and services that we all enjoy. This is what creates economic growth. It's also worth noting that this myth that spending is inherently better for an economy than saving, that's only true if you're talking about somebody who's actually taking the cash and just shoving it into their mattress. Banks are in the business of lending. When they take the money in, they don't just stick it in Al Gore's fake lockbox. They actually lend the money back out to people to actually create new businesses and new products. You had an investor, right? When you started TYT, you were given $4 million by Buddy Roemer to start TYT. That's great. That's the way business should work, right? But that money it didn't come from a bunch of poor people buying hamburgers. It came from a very, very wealthy guy who gave you money to create a business a lot of people want to patronize. If you want better products and better services, you need more investment in the products and services.
But what if the government borrows the money? Well, again, that's money that someone would have otherwise saved or spent. Also, the more money the government borrows, the less money there is for banks to lend out, which raises interest rates, which makes it more difficult for companies as well as average people to borrow. This means that fewer people will buy homes and cars, and companies will make fewer investments. Furthermore, the government will eventually have to pay that borrowed money back, with interest. That means down the line, taxes will either have to be raised or the government will have to borrow even more money or cut more spending. These reasons, among others, are why people like me would rather let people decide for themselves how best to spend and invest their money, rather than put these decisions in the hands of the government. There are some of the economic reasons why I think this is stupid. Let's talk about something that might be even more important: the moral hazard. As often happens on Secular Talk, Kyle very nearly stumbles upon a point.
The far-right belief in austerity is selective. That's not really addressed in that video. Again, it's a good video, but take the U.S., for example. They don't believe in austerity at all when it comes to the military budget, for example. They want to spend until the cows come home. They want to go nuts.
I actually agree with him. We do spend too much money on defense. Here's the thing though, it's not corruption or the greed of the 1% that got us here. It's the very Keynesian logic that Kyle and Jeremy Corbyn are advocating for that is responsible. The fact is, the military-industrial complex, which Kyle so maligns, is a jobs program. You see, I actually work for a defense contractor, and I can tell you firsthand that military spending creates lots of jobs, including tons of unionized manufacturing jobs, the kind that Kyle constantly gushes over. In fact, defense contractors have strategically located facilities within enough congressional districts so as to ensure that that sweet taxpayer money keeps going to them. That's their largest form of leverage. Yes, they lobby the government and do other things, but the biggest thing they have going for them is that they provide jobs. And so long as they do, the same anti-austerity logic holds up for the defense industry. Spending lots of money creates lots of jobs, which in turn spurs the economy down the line. And reversing that would create lots of short-term pain for these workers and the communities around them. Of course, all of this happens at the expense of other parts of the economy, and it also results in a highly visible, horribly inefficient use of resources. In a market economy, this level of inefficiency would not be tolerated for very long. Because in economics, jobs are a means to an end. Most people go to work not because they love being there, but because they want to make money so they can spend it on things they actually want or need. When businesses hire people, they typically don't do it for the sake of merely creating jobs. They do it so they can better deliver goods and services to customers. When people spend their money, they usually don't do it to support workers in a given industry. They do it to get something in return. Politicians, however, view jobs as ends in and of themselves, and once jobs become the endgame, you start to get massive misallocation of resources. But for our elected officials, that doesn't matter. The fundamental concern of a politician is getting reelected, and if you have lots of angry, unemployed workers in your district, then that goal is in jeopardy. So, if faced with the option of cutting spending where it is no longer needed, or keeping jobs in your district, you're going to go with the latter, even if it means there's going to be terrible waste. In other words, the politician does not have the incentive to spend the money where it is most needed, but to spend it in a way that is most politically advantageous to him or her personally. Another fantastic example of this is infrastructure. Kyle is always calling for a New Deal, and constantly complains about how our infrastructure is so horrible.
We have a crumbling infrastructure, a grade of D+ for our infrastructure. We're not doing dick about that, but we can build brand new infrastructure surrounding a new drone base in Niger.
The fact is, infrastructure spending really hasn't changed over the last 30 years. According to the Congressional Budget Office, federal, state, and local spending on these projects has remained relatively constant since the late 1980s. And yet almost everything is in poor condition. Like defense spending, we have a problem with incentives here. If the goal is to create jobs and boost economic growth, then there's a good chance you won't get optimal results. You see, the projects that create the most jobs in the most politically advantageous places aren't always the projects that are most needed. Simply shoveling more money into the system won't necessarily help you either. China spends more money than any country on infrastructure, and they have created some pretty impressive things. They also have entire cities where no one lives.
These are China's ghost cities, sprawling, empty spaces, just waiting for one thing: people.
All of them were bizarre. All of them were surreal. There's no other way to describe just a city meant for thousands of people that's just completely empty.
The few people that live here often wonder if they'll ever get neighbours.
On paper, though, this looks like economic growth, and constructing these ghost cities has created lots of jobs, which is why they were built in the first place. But much like our fields of tanks collecting dust, these resources could have gone towards something much more useful. It's also worth noting that, in the American context, infrastructure projects are frequently given out in the form of earmarks and pork barrel spending as a means of buying votes in Congress. This is not only unseemly, it is another example of how we get so much waste. These projects being funded aren't always the ones that are most needed. This is how we got the infamous bridge to nowhere. To a certain extent, this problem with government spending is unavoidable. That's one of the many reasons why I oppose the expansion of government authority. But the problem becomes far worse once you assume it's the government's responsibility to boost aggregate demand. The point of defense spending is to create military hardware to protect us, not to create jobs in the Rust Belt. The point of infrastructure spending is to build roads, bridges, and tunnels for us to use, not to fund pet projects for politicians in important districts. The point of education spending is to educate the public, not to spur economic growth, and so on and so forth. But Kyle doesn't agree, because he doesn't get it.
Kyle doesn't get it, he's an idiot.